fighting for survival, and joining us from Lahore, Pakistan, former Prime Minister Imran Khan is facing off against the ruling party and military establishment. As we speak, a warrant for your arrest without the possibility of parole has been issued. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you for this time with the Media Line. You have just come from the courts again, and if you can share with us what happened today and what is going on, why are you being charged? And if you can enlighten the audience, there were 170 counts against you. What does this mean?
Well, just to give your audience a background of what's going on, or why have I got 170 cases against me, ranging from terrorism to sedition to corruption, 2 corruption cases out of 170. But mainly they're about criminal cases, and latest one is on murder as well. I'm supposed to have murdered someone. So here is a person who's known in this country for 50 years. No Pakistani has been known for such a long time, because I used to be a sportsman for 20 years and at the time the biggest sportsman. And then I am the biggest philanthropist in this country, who's built the biggest charitable institutions here. So people know me for a long time, and I am the one who collects the highest amount of money every year for charity, because people have trusted me. So suddenly at 70, no criminal case, and then just in the last few months, I have 170 cases. So people don't take seriously. People don't believe this. But why is this happening? Because the military establishment, or the army chief to be precise, because military establishment means one man, the army chief. So he conspired to remove me. This was in April last year. But what happened after that is unique in Pakistan. I was removed on the 9th of April. 10th of April, for the first time in our history, hundreds and thousands of people came out in the street protesting protesting against this. So that took the military establishment or the army chief by surprise. And then they thought that, this is just a bubble. They started victimizing my party, thinking that, once the establishment is against a party, normally, no one stands up against the military establishment or the army chief. But what happened subsequently is that out of 37 by-elections, despite the military establishment supporting these 12-party coalition, we won 30 out of 37 by-elections. So again, unprecedented. Then was this assassination attempt, because they thought, if they couldn't remove me through politics, then to do the final solution. And so once I was lucky to survive that. And then there was another assassination attempt on me on the 18th of March. Unfortunately, I was lucky to survive that too. Now, the situation is that they were so desperate that since the party, whatever they do, the party keeps growing in popularity, and it is arguably the most popular party in our history right now. Our rating is north of 70% in this country. And so now the game plan is that, using the pretext of 9th May, when they abducted me, when the army abducted me from the precincts of the High Court, like some terrorists, and they used that reaction as a pretext to completely dismantle the party. So 10,000 of our workers in 48 hours were put in jail. So clearly it was pre-planned. Otherwise, you can't just pick up 10,000 people. Obviously, they had planned it before. So the reaction to the way I was abducted, they used that reaction to put 10,000 workers in jail, my entire senior leadership in jail. The only way they can come out, the senior leadership, if they renounce the party, they say, we are leaving the party, then all is forgiven. So all criminal cases are dropped the moment they say, I'm leaving the party. And the rest of my party is in hiding right now. So I'm basically, the only one outside, because the Supreme Court made it illegal, unlawful, my abduction. So I'm still outside. But I don't expect to be outside for long. I think they will, it's a matter of time before they jail me. That's the only way they feel that they can stop us from winning the next elections.
So, Chairman, if you have so many of your people that are following you and supporters that are either being put down or suppressed in some form, what's the next strategy and what would happen with the elections that are supposed to be in October?
The problem establishment does not understand. And I again repeat, the current army chief, he's the establishment. He doesn't understand one point, that once people make up their minds that they are going to back a certain party, as you say, no army or force can stop an idea whose time has come. So once people believe and they stand behind a political party, you cannot then wish it away by these draconian measures, by this extreme victimization, by jailing the workers and leadership. Because whenever there are elections, and I can predict right now, because it has happened in the past. In 1970, the establishment tried to ban the biggest party, and it swept the whole of the elections was swept by that party, despite the establishment trying to stop it. It's the same situation. No matter what they do, the moment the election campaign starts, they will not be able to stop PTI, my party, from winning the elections.
Even if you're sitting in prison?
Even if I'm disqualified or I'm sitting in prison, they cannot stop a vote bank. The vote bank of the party keeps increasing. So after 9th of May crackdown, the worst crackdown in our history, by the way. I mean, crackdown means that not just that they have abducted and put people in jail, custodial torture, a lot of them have suffered custodial torture, stuck in this, it's the hottest time in this country. And people have suffered illnesses because they've been stuck in these cramped cells. And despite all that, the party is not breaking. I mean, some of the leaders have left under pressure, but the workers and the vote bank keeps increasing. And the other thing is the judiciary today, they have tried to completely, what should I say, make the judiciary impotent. I mean, they don't listen to the verdicts of a Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ordered election in the biggest province on 14th of May. They refused, the government refused. Our workers go out for bail, the police picks them up in another case. They've completely muzzled the media. Never has the media is not allowed to utter one word about me. I mean, it's never happened here before. Even in martial laws, media was not muzzled like that can't even utter a word about me. And one of our best investigative journalists has been abducted. For months, he's disappeared. 4 of our top journalists have left the country because of these draconian measures. So despite all that, which are these desperate measures only to keep me out, it's not working because the public is supporting the party and the support is growing even more.
You're talking about, Mr. Khan, growing support for your party, but let's focus a little bit about the unheard of number of charges that you're faced with. And if those charges, some say likely that you have to serve some time in jail, and this would be a long time, unfortunately for you. What does it say about the political system in Pakistan, and what's your feeling on the general view of what's happening to you?
Our 75-year history in Pakistan, roughly half the time we've been ruled by military dictators, and the other half time by these two families, who we really call mafias because they've degenerated into mafias, and they have massive criminal corruption cases against them. I mean, one of the Sharif family was caught in what were the Panama Papers disclosures when this was an international disclosure about properties and offshore accounts by heads of states and ministers. And so, these two families have basically now, first they used to fight each other, but they've colluded with each other. They are now together against me. So since I came in, they have all got together, and now they are backed by the military establishment. So between the two families and the military, Pakistan has been really ruled for the past 65 years. Now I am an outsider. So since I have come in, I now face this combined opposition. Now, the answer to your question. Now, the question is about all these cases and, how they want to imprison me. What do you think? How do you think I will cope with it? I'm fighting in all the court cases. Normally what has happened is one of the two families, when they're outside power, they all leave the country. They go outside. So I decided I would stay and fight all my cases. In fact, I have asked them that they should televise all my cases, that all my cases should be televised so people should know the charges against me, because some of them are so ridiculous that, they will be exposed as what is going on. How can you have 170 cases against one man in just a few months? So, as I said, cases range from blasphemy, blasphemy, sedition, and so on. So all I want is my cases should be heard publicly. They should be, like in the US, like your famous O.J. Simpson case, which was watched by everyone. We want cases like that to be, in public. So let the people know these cases against me.
One place we're not hearing from, or one side, is the international community. Normally, when there is a military coup or a democratically elected leader is removed or deposed by the military, we hear criticism and strong statements from Washington, from London, and elsewhere. World reaction to what's happening to you and in Pakistan has been somewhat mute. We haven't heard a whole lot. And, what's happening to that? Interestingly enough, hasn't been a whole lot of statements in your support. Why do you think that's the case? And would you like to see British Prime Minister or even President Joe Biden come out in support of you?
The tragedy is that Pakistan's democracy was evolving. In the past 20 years, we made strides in our democratic system. What happened was that the media started asserting its independence. We had electronic media coming in. Normally, there used to be only one government-controlled channel. So in 20 years, we have about 40 TV channels now. And we had media competing with each other and sort of a vibrant media, which is one of the pillars of democracy. And the second is that from last 16 years, a judiciary before that used to be part of the executive. So it never protected the fundamentals rights of the people, because they went along with whatever the executive was doing. So 16, 17 years back, our judiciary started asserting its independence. And there was a lawyers' movement for the independence of judiciary, which I participated. I also went to jail in that movement. But since then, the judiciary also came out as a defender of democracy and our fundamental rights. All that now is being rolled back. Not just that the judiciary is now controlled, or they're trying to control it, because they have now announced, the government has announced military courts to try civilians like me. That's the end of your democracy. In which democracy do you have military courts trying civilians? That case is going on in the Supreme Court right now. And the government ministers are saying that if the Supreme Court decides against military courts, they won't obey the orders of the Supreme Court. So this is the situation right now. The judiciary is muzzled. They're trying to hamstring it. Media is totally muzzled. I repeat, my name is not allowed to be mentioned on it. Completely controlled. So it is a huge setback to our democracy. Now, what is surprising is that the Western leaders who talk about democracy, fundamental rights, human rights, against custodial torture. All these things are said when they are talking about what's going on in Hong Kong or what's going on against the Uyghurs in China or about Russia, the lack of democracy. And yet they're completely silent. And my hunch is that because I think the Pakistan establishment is helping in Ukraine, and secondly, I'm considered a nationalist. You know, normally Pakistani prime ministers were considered very subservient. You know, whatever Washington said they did. I mean, they participated in the war on terror. I was a big opponent of the Pakistan participating in the war on terror because Pakistan lost 80,000 people dead in that. How can a country, it's great to help other countries, but you can't sacrifice your 80,000 people. Has any US ally ever taken such heavy casualties? And over $100 billion lost to the economy. Now, this is a country which has 100 million people who are vulnerable, either below the poverty line or just above it. So my point is that the first priority of a prime minister must be the welfare of your people, and especially poverty, reducing poverty. So I think maybe they think I'm ultra nationalist, and maybe they think, and I wanted to be neutral in this war, by the way, Ukraine versus Russia, just like India, because again, we needed cheap oil from Russia. We needed, like India has, and we needed 2 million tons of grain from India because there's a shortage here. And so being neutral, India has been able to, have oil at 40% discount at a time of inflation all over the world. Meanwhile, we in Pakistan have suffered the worst inflation on ice. We have 38% inflation in this country, so which is causing poverty. So my whole point is that the country's foreign policy should reflect the interest and aspirations of the people of that country. And maybe that's why they think, this government is more of an ally because it is helping them in Ukraine. Maybe that's why.
Some say that you may have upset the Americans when you accused them of imposing or interfering and passing messages to your ambassador in Washington, saying that a vote of confidence should be called upon you. And also, there are accusations that you've become so close to Putin, and that upset your allies, the US.
Look, well, let's be clear about President Putin. I mean, my foreign office and our military leadership, they wanted me to take the trip to Russia. And that trip was planned about a month before. And the idea was, that, as I said, we needed cheap oil, we needed a pipeline because they have expertise in building pipelines, a gas pipeline, which we wanted to build. And secondly, we have a shortage of wheat, a growing population, so we needed, wheat from Russia, and the military needed some hardware. So the trip was planned a month ago. How was I supposed to know that I arrived the night before and the next morning Russia invades Ukraine? How was I supposed to know? So anyway, bad timing. Obviously, if I had known, I wouldn't have gone. But about this, the second thing, of your first point, look, what were the facts? On the 6th or 7th of March, 22, I get a cipher. Cipher is the coded message sent by your ambassador from Washington. And I get a cipher, and it is talking about a meeting, official meeting, he had with the American Undersecretary of State. And the cipher said, the American was telling my ambassador that unless Imran Khan, the prime minister, is removed through a vote of no confidence, there will be consequences for Pakistan. I mean, imagine an elected prime minister reading this cipher. What would he think? And then the next day, there is a vote of no confidence. So this message clearly was to the army chief, because he then couldn't be to be. I mean, I was the head of the foreign office. I mean, I was the PM. So the message that clearly the army chief moved in and he pulled the strings, and a government that had been performing the best economic performance in 17 years, which is recorded in our annual survey, economic survey of Pakistan. And secondly, one of the top 3 countries which dealt with the COVID-19 crisis the best. So in the next day, there's a vote of no confidence, and within weeks, my government is gone. So that's what happened. But later on, we discovered that this whole thing was initiated by my army chief, who was, who was planning to get an extension from the current prime minister. And so he then, this whole conspiracy was managed, and he then fed the Americans that Imran Khan was this anti-American bad guy.
How would you describe your relationship with the current Biden administration and the previous administration, the Trump administration?
Well, I had very good relationship with the Trump administration. And, I visited Washington twice, and I had meetings with President Trump. And really, we talked about a lot of things, but especially at that time, the biggest problem US faced was Afghanistan and the withdrawal from Afghanistan. And Pakistan played a big part in getting the US and the Taliban to sit together. So my government played that big part in getting them together on the talk, which took place in Doha. And so, I had meetings with him, plus we discussed other things. So it's just that when President Trump went and President Biden came, I have no idea why, but he never communicated with me, President Biden, for reasons he knows best. And somehow, although my foreign minister, spoke to Secretary Blinken a few times, there were others, but I never had any direct communication with President Biden after that. And in fact, there was no American ambassador in Pakistan either. So the answer is no, I had no communication. As Prime Minister, I had no communication.
In looking at how everything played out with the Taliban, particularly in the last year and a half, do you think it was the right move? Would you say right now that America should be cajoled to being in parcel of this speaking to the Taliban?
As someone who from day one kept saying that there will never be a military solution in Afghanistan, because someone who knows the history of Afghanistan. And my party was in power in what is called the KP province, Pakhtunkhwa province, which borders Afghanistan. So first, I won the election in 2013 there, and my party was in power 5 years. Then in 2018, I won the national election. So it was we formed government at the federal level. Now, I know what, the whole war on terror that took place and the US went into Afghanistan. If you know the history of Afghanistan, this was the most ridiculous mission ever taken by the US. Because whenever you have a mission, it must have aims. What do you want to achieve at the end? Suddenly we began to everyone realized that they had no aim. They didn't know what they were doing there. Did they go there to liberate Afghan women? I mean, if you speak to the ordinary Americans, they talk about the Afghan women. But has it ever happened that a country invades another country to liberate their women? Can this ever happen? And secondly, about bringing democracy to Afghanistan. It's like bringing democracy to Iraq. Democracies evolve from within. Like, when you ask me that what do I expect from world leaders, I only want world leaders to talk about the values, the Western values, which are promoted by them. As I said, it should not be just used against adversaries. It should be consistent. So you can, from outside, promote and you can incentivize democracy, but by actually going in by force, occupying another country and trying to bring democracy, it failed in Vietnam, it failed in Iraq, it was going to definitely fail in Afghanistan, because Afghanistan was even more different to Iraq. So some people like us were saying that, look, firstly, your aims are not clear. And secondly, whatever aims you're saying about bringing democracy and liberating women is not going to happen. And so people like us were perceived as anti-American. But in the end, what choices did the US have? They had to do a withdrawal. It could not be a permanent. The Afghan, the whole of rural Afghanistan was under Taliban anyway. It was the Afghan government was only confined to the cities at the end. And then they had trained these 300,000 Afghan soldiers with the latest equipment and another 100,000, I think, police and all the security forces and contractors. But the moment the US were going to leave, it was inevitable what was going to happen. Even when I spoke to President Trump in a big meeting, he clearly said that the Afghan government won't last 6 months after we leave. But he was being generous. People like us understood that this is once the whole population had turned against the way the corruption of the Afghan government, the way they were running the whole show, so it was a pack of cards. Problem is, withdrawal was always going to be a problem. Now, had it been a phased withdrawal, it might have worked. But to be fair to President Biden, how was he supposed to know that 300,000 Afghan soldiers would give up without a fight? How was he supposed to know that President Ghani would just in the middle of the night take off and do a runner? So the president taking off took everyone by surprise and the whole thing collapsed. And so the awful scenes of withdrawal, which took place and the airport scenes, I mean, that's what shocked the people of the United States and all over the world. They were terrible scenes. But had President Ghani not left like that, the Afghan army would not have collapsed. There could have been a phased withdrawal and things would not have looked as bad as they did.
Well, let me take you back, Mr. Khan, to the time when you were a prime minister. You seem to have good relationship with many leaders of the Muslim world, many of the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Countries, like former Indonesian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. However, it seemed that you had a lukewarm relationship at best with two major countries, at least to Pakistan, and that is China on one hand and Saudi Arabia on the other hand. Do you agree with this assessment?
Not at all. I had, meetings with President Xi Jinping. We had very good relationship. I mean, because, we had CPAC, which was very important for Pakistan. And secondly, China has been Pakistan's closest ally for 60 years. So I had excellent relationship with him. Unfortunately, COVID-19 hit us and China closed down for 2 years. Remember, China had such quarantine laws that they just shut up for 2 years. So out of 3.5 years, 2 years went there and that slowed down, our economic cooperation. So with Mohammed bin Salman, I had excellent relationship. There was just a little problem once. There was supposed to be a conference in Malaysia, which he objected, and I didn't go to that conference. But that was just a little bit of disagreement. But you must remember that in my last 4 months of my government, we had 2 OIC foreign ministers meeting in Pakistan, one in December, one in March. So 2 OIC meetings in Pakistan, they could not have happened without the consent of Mohammed bin Salman, because Saudi Arabia plays a big part. It's a big player in OIC.
What was Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's objection to you attending the OIC conference in Indonesia?
It wasn't an OIC conference in Malaysia. It was an invitation by then Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, and it was President Tayyip Erdogan, who also was going there, and he had invited me. So somehow, I don't know, there was an objection. And so in the end, I canceled my visit to Malaysia. Uh, but that was the only, I guess, slight disagreement we had or irritant we had. Otherwise, but then you know, I went to Saudi Arabia. I mean, I had good relationship with Mohammed bin Salman.
You began this interview, and you talked about the fact that all these arrests are imminent. You can't get your message out. It must be very frustrating. My question is twofold. One, in looking back, is there something you might have done differently to not create so many enemies? And secondarily, how can you get accurate information out in an age of misinformation to begin with? And secondarily, what do you feel on that score is really not getting out, particularly to the Western market?
First of all, what could I have done differently? I'm afraid, if you take a stand against the status quo, a status quo that has ruled Pakistan virtually for last 70 years, so you're always going to make enemies. I mean, you can't, a leader has to make a decision. Does he want power for power's sake? Or does he want power for a specific purpose? In my case, was rule of law. I started my politics 27 years ago called Movement for Justice. And for me, the basis of a civilized society is rule of law. To me, the difference between rich and poor countries is only one, rule of law. Rich countries have rule of law, poor countries have law of the jungle. That's why they're poor. It's not because of lack of resources. And Pakistan is a classic country. In the 60s, we were the fastest growing developing country in Asia. We were made an example of development. And we lost our way because unfortunately, we have this ruling elite which is above law. And it never, once you do not have rule of law, you don't have a level playing field. So you just cannot prosper. If the weak cannot be protected from the strong by your judiciary, by your law, then unfortunately, that country cannot prosper. It's, in fact, only free countries prosper. Countries that have freedom. And freedom comes from rule of law. And only if rule of law gives you genuine democracy. Elections don't give you democracy. When you have rule of law, you have what is called a genuine democracy. And genuine democracy means freedom. And free people prosper. Why are you having these situations where people dying in boats trying to get to Europe? Why you have so many people from Southern America trying to get into the US? Because all these countries don't have rule of law. They have conflicts. When you don't have rule of law, you have conflicts. You have, the ruling elites of the poor countries plunder the countries. All the developing countries are being plundered by the ruling elites because they're above law. Because, look, according to this panel made by the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, he made this panel called the Fact-Eye Panel, where he had a group of economists, and the job was, why are poor countries getting poor and rich countries getting richer? And that panel, after a year, came up with these figures, which are astounding. $1.7 trillion every year are shifted from poor countries to rich capitals, to offshore accounts. So, I mean, this plunder takes place because the countries can't bring the powerful under the law. And that is what I came into politics 27 years ago. And whenever I was going to do that, I knew that the powerful mafias would attack me. So I knew, I didn't come in not expecting opposition. I knew I would be opposed. I knew my life would be in danger because the powerful don't want, they are raking it in. Why would they want to lose power by me winning? So hence, all these cases, assassination attempts, possibility of jail and so on. That's why.
Mr. Khan, you, despite your age, young, 70 years old, and you've had a great athletic career, but you connected with the young people of Pakistan, young men and women. You've utilized social media to your advantage, and you've given those young people hope that Pakistan is changing and is evolving. Talk to us about your usage of social media, and how did you and why are you so popular with the young Pakistanis, young people of Pakistan, and how were you able to successfully connect with them? And how do you stay in touch with them right now?
You know, probably one of the uh, big names in sports in my country, and then achieving in sports until then, which no other sportsman had achieved. And cricket was the most popular game. So I was already a big name in the young, amongst the young people. And then, you know, I built the biggest charitable institutions. I built 2 cancer hospitals for 70% free treatment. And then I built 2 universities. One is just starting, but the other one is also new, about 10 years ago, 10 years old. That too has 90% underprivileged people on scholarship. So, people give me, I collect more money than anyone has ever collected in our history because people trust me. So I was already known in Pakistan before I came into politics. And for 14 years in politics, I was in the wilderness because I had these 2 established parties, entrenched parties, and I was an outsider. So 14 years I was, you know, people never thought I would ever win. And one of the reasons was that the media, the mainstream media, was controlled by the government, and the private channels, the media owners had their own business interests. So their business interests were with these 2 main parties. So I was nowhere. Then came social media, and I'm talking about, you know, round about 2008, 9, 10, that sort of period. And we were the first party to utilize social media, whether the 2 mainstream parties had no idea, because the younger people joined me, and the younger people were all on social media. So we had a head start. And right now, my only form of communication is through social media. I utilize YouTube. You know, I give my talks on YouTube. My Twitter is almost 20 million followers on my Twitter, so I use that. And that's how I communicate right now, because on the electronic media and print media in this country, I'm banned.
So before we let you go, what are the most important words you would like to leave us with?
It's very important for Western countries, and I'm talking about the governments and the media as well, that they must stand for democracy, because democracy is freedom. The worst thing you can do is to enslave human beings. And we have enough experience now, if we look back, say just after Second World War, the countries that went democratic were called what was called the free world. And you look at the sort of the countries that had totalitarian states became, you know, controlled, like Eastern Europe and Western Europe. After 50 years, you could see that the countries that had democracy and freedom prospered. I mean, their standard of living went way up compared to the ones that were controlled. The classic cases of Germany, East and West Germany, the same people. West Germany prospered, East Germany was way behind. South Korea, North Korea. One country has totalitarian control. There's people, look at the standard of living between the difference between the two. So what Pakistan is now, what I call on the edge of darkness. We can either now go towards what we are striving for, a democratic part of a country with free and fair elections, or we are heading towards, you know, the dark ages, where we will have military basically running the country. And, you know, we all know the countries where there's military right now, Myanmar, and countries like, you know, even Sudan. I mean, that's why you have immigration from there, people leaving in droves because they see no hope in that.
Chairman Khan, we wish you safety, best of luck, and we hope that your message gets out. And thank you so much for joining us, the former Prime Minister of Pakistan.
Thank you very much.